If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Shameem Clark Hubbard was first elected to the Board of Aldermen earlier this year, but that doesn't mean the 26th Ward Democrat is a newcomer to politics. In fact, her family has a storied history in St. Louis, and she joins us on the latest edition of Politically Speaking to talk about that legacy and what's ahead for the Board of Aldermen in 2019. Let's hit the music.
This is Politically Speaking, the longest-running episodic podcast about Missouri politics.
It's a little complicated in Bolivar because there is a Parsons family there.
But we also knew that it was important to make sure that we got to where we needed to go.
You know, if you walk in a room and you're getting ready to make a decision and everybody in the room looks like you need to stop.
And right now what happens in the United States Senate is as critical as anywhere else in the country.
I really want the state to succeed.
Well, we want everybody to know that we're all working together.
I just worked hard to try to build my name where I didn't have the money.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a political correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio. Joining us in studio today, the Alderwoman for the 26th Ward of St. Louis. Our guest today is
Shameem Clark Hubbard.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
First-time guest, but I think I've known you for a really long time. I think I actually saw you debate for 26th Ward committeewoman back in 2012.
That's where we met. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been a long journey to get to this point.
Yeah, that was 2012. And that was an exciting night. That was an exciting time. And I was excited to meet you because I followed you for so long.
Oh, my
Prior
gosh.
to that, you know that. So I followed you on social medias and everything. So I was like, it was kind of like meeting a star, somebody you follow and listen to all the time. But then when I saw you sitting back there, I was like,
you know, flattery will get you nowhere on this show.
Hey.
I'm still going to ask you really hard questions, even though...
I'm ready.
I know
I
you're
was
ready.
looking forward to this, Jason. You know that.
I know. So before we talk about your biography and talk about the issues that are in your ward in St. Louis, just give our listeners a rough boundary of what the 26th Ward is.
So a rough boundary is on the southwest side. We butt up against the 28th Ward at the corner of Waterman and DePere. On the east side, northeast side is our furthest east point, and that's Kings Highway and Martin Luther King at Wold Community Center in Sherman Park. On the, the northwest end, we butt up against Wellston University City. It kind of weaves in and out over there at Skinker and in Edsel area. So it's a very diverse ward the way it's cut up, and I actually have Delmar that comes down, not the middle, but kind of the middle. And at Delmar, we stop at a street called Clarendon that is just east of Union.
It's kind of a political powerhouse ward. Obviously, This was the ward that Bill Clay represented, both as an alderman and a committeeman. I believe Darlene Green lives in the 26th Ward. She's a powerhouse, too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
absolutely a powerhouse.
I think that there are other notable political figures that have lived there or live there now as well.
Still live there now. We actually have our state senator, Carla May, lives in the 26th Ward.
My state senator, too, by the way.
Yes, that's right.
She does represent Richmond Heights.
Yes.
Let's not forget that.
And we also have our St. Louis City Treasurer, Tashara Jones, lives in our ward.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a powerhouse, and we're proud of it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. This is not actually the first elected office that you've been elected to, as we kind of talked about. You were the committee woman for the 26th Ward for about 4 years. But even before that, your political legacy goes back several generations. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about yourself and your family's history in politics.
Right, and I love this opportunity. I never waste one to talk about my grandfather, who was Joseph Clark Sr. He was an alderman in the 4th Ward from 1963 to 1973. He was a president not just of local chapters, but of regional chapters of the NAACP. He was the first African-American director of public safety in the city of St. Louis. And also, it was also called public welfare back then as well. And he had a lot of offices and a lot of responsibilities up under there and made a lot of change up under there. And then in his retirement, he started an organization called Self-Help Housing Corporation, where they would literally pick men up off the corners, along with working with some job creation programs, teach them the trade of construction, and then they built houses that still actually stand today and people live in today in the Fourth Ward. This was at a time when they weren't accepting African Americans into the trade unions. So it was hard for them to get this kind of training, extended training and jobs. And he broke down barriers with that, as well as several other barriers. But that was the legacy which I grew up under, which he was my papa. And growing up seeing that, knowing about the importance of civic engagement, then as a young adult, I moved back to the Fourth Ward. I grew up in the 26th Ward. When we moved from the Fourth Ward, I kind of went back and forth. So as an adult, when I graduated from high school, I moved back to the Fourth Ward in our family home. And when I was living in the Fourth Ward under O.L. Shelton, I would work in the community. It's a former big name over there in the Fourth Ward in the Ville. I would work in the community. I used to throw back to school picnics at Tandy Park, things like that nature. And in doing that, I got connected with my husband, my now husband, Rodney Hubbard. So I was born into politics, and then I married a politician.
Right. Rodney Hubbard, by the way, for people that don't know, and we're talking about Rodney Hubbard Jr., because there's also a Rodney Hubbard Sr., who's
my
also
father-in-law,
who's also
shout out, just turned 70 yesterday. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to him. He's a former state representative, served for 8 years in the Missouri House, lost a very close Senate race in 2008, and has been a lobbyist in Jefferson City now for almost 10 years.
Yeah, the time flies.
It's crazy.
So it flies. So, so I moved. I tease about that all the time because people want to know if you're from the city. Not only am I from the city, I've never left the city. Literally, I went from the 4th Ward to the 26th Ward, a little bit down in the 5th, and then back to the 26th Ward, back to the 4th Ward, back to the 26th Ward. So I've been in this area my whole life and engaging in community service my whole life.
Was it difficult tearing Rodney Jr. away from the 5th Ward to move to the 26th Ward? Because I know he's super invested in the 5th Ward.
He's super invested in every chance we get, because not just because of our family that still lives down there, but because of the connection to the community down there. And don't forget, I lived down there myself for a small a period of time, and I fell in love with the 5th Ward and the community down there. And my children, my first child was born down in the 5th Ward, so she has connections. We have connections there. But what's funny, Jason, is actually when you think back, you never know what's happening with your connections. I grew up somewhat in the 5th Ward because my mother, Rochelle Clark, was nurse practitioner at Courtney Clinic, which is down in the 5th Ward. I'm sorry, in the 5th Ward. So when she would be at work, I would be running around Car Square Village where my babysitter was while she was at work. So we teased because the lady who was my babysitter actually lived somewhat almost next door to Rodney's grandmother.
Oh, my gosh.
So we've been just connected and didn't even know it. And then later on, my grandfather was one of the pivotal voices who fought to get the residency and get the home ownership housing corporation for Car Square Tenant Management Housing Corporation when they flew to D.C. and fought for them. My grandfather was on that plane and at the forefront of that. So this is before me and Rodney even knew each other or knew of each other. And now we're back connected. So it just, it just speaks to when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
So let's flash forward to a few months ago, when you ran for Alderwoman in the 26th Ward. Frank Williamson, the former alderman, resigned to become, I guess, a member of the treasurer's office. So it was an open race. It was a very competitive race between you and two other candidates, and it was a very close outcome. I would say that, I joke about the idea of the Hubbard dynasty, so to speak. I don't really think the Hubbard machine necessarily translated to the 26th Ward, because that's basically in the 5th Ward. So basically you had to hoof it in the 26th Ward on your own and make your own name for yourself. What was it like running for this seat in a very competitive environment like it was?
It was a surprisingly different race than I thought it would be. By no means did I think once I just told everybody that I was going to run, that I was going to have everybody's support. But I'm going to be honest, I did feel like I was going to have some support that I didn't have going into the race. I was committee woman from 2012 to 2016. That was my full tenure. I didn't leave that office. I just decided not to run for re-election. In not running for re-election, I never stopped doing all of the things that I was doing other than going to the Democratic Central Committee meetings and serving in that titled position, but I never stopped doing the work. So people actually, when I was running, still thought that I was the committee person. They didn't even know that it had been a transition.
And Carla May is, by the way, is the committee person.
Yes, Carla May, who I
right
supported, and that is who I supported for committee woman in the 2016 election. And so with that being said, I ran a tough race. I had the support of my family, of my dynasty that you talked to. But
by the way, somebody asked on Twitter, like, am I using the term dynasty as a pejorative? I'm not using it as a pejorative.
Right.
Usually, if you have more than 3 members of a family, I call them a dynasty, whether they're white, black, purple, orange, whatever.
Right.
I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. And I didn't receive it. I didn't take it that way. With that being said, it did translate differently in the 26th ward, and that's very notable, and it was a lot of hard work in that campaign because I found myself at times, and we all talked about this, I found myself defending myself against my family that has done nothing but support and serve in their communities for their whole tenure. So it was kind of funny how people would take something like that and try to use it against you, but I was ready every time to defend not only my family's name, but our record of service in the community.
Because for a little context, and we talked a little bit about this when Rodney Jr. was on the show, I think that the Hubbard political dynasty machine legacy is one of pragmatism. Like when Rodney Jr. was in the House, he worked with Republicans closely, which got him a lot done, but it also made him a magnet for criticism from Democrats saying he was like a sellout or not a real Democrat. And obviously there was the whole Penny Hubbard, Bruce Frank situation, which became probably the most covered state rep race in recent memory. So obviously that was a lot of scrutiny on the Hubbard name. But I mean, as I kind of said before, because you had your own political story apart from the Hubbard family, it didn't seem like this was the same situation as Rodney Jr. running or Penny Hubbard running or even Tamika Hubbard running. This was kind of like you had to kind of do this with the help of a political organization, but kind of on your own in many respects.
Yep, I did. And I think people saw that more and more as the campaign went on. I think people saw that and they saw how hard I was working and how much I was committed to not only the position and the process the position I had served in before, but to this new position. I would have never ran against Frank. Frank and I, former Alderman Frank Williamson, I had the utmost respect for him. We had a great working relationship. I would have never ran against Frank. But when he decided to resign, that was the last week in November. And a lot of people use the example or use the excuse that I didn't file first when filing open. Filing has dates. I filed when I filed strategically. Actually, for me, I just didn't think that I needed to interrupt a month like December with a campaign that I knew I could run just as effectively from January through March.
So having that political experience is helpful in that regard.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, before we get into issues, you do have a day job, too, as well. I want you to talk a little about your day job because from talking with former Senator Jeff Smith, apparently he has been to your business many times and I think still goes to your business.
I know he's going to kill me because I'm trying to get him. I missed a couple of opportunities to get Jeff in. Jeff is a really good friend of mine. And yes, my day job is a cosmetologist, a licensed cosmetologist in the state of Missouri. So I've owned and operated my own salon in the 26th ward for 15 years. I don't have it now. I had closed it to try to look for another location, and then things just changed. That was what was planned to be a 2-year close has now been a 5-year close. But I'm still practicing cosmetology in the state, and I still would love to cut Jeff's hair when I see him.
Fair enough. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Make sure he hears me.
So what are the big issues in the 26th ward? It's like a lot of majority African-American wards. There's always disinvestment. There's crime, but it seems like it's a little bit different than some of the other ones just because it's more centrally located. There's already a lot of like housing stock and development there, but I'm sure that there's challenges like any ward, white or black, in the city of St. Louis. So I'm interested to hear what the big issues that you hear from ordinary folks are.
Actually, I guess though the biggest issue still in my ward with the diversity is the public safety, the crime. So I talked about it during my campaign that on one end of my ward, I just have different issues from one end of my ward. People are trying to just live their lives from day to day. It just trickled on down to how we're going to feed our kids, or what are we going to do with our kids, or how we're going to move on with our lives. But the other end of my ward, the issues like airport privatization and the former Better Together plan and things like that were on their, that's what they were worried about. So to legislate on the different ends and come in the middle and make sure everybody feels properly served is my main platform and my main concern, because going into the campaign, a lot of people felt like they were not heard. They were disenfranchised just within the ward. So me making sure for myself that everybody feels served, everybody feels just as important from one end to the next, is how I have gone into this seat. And now being a month and a half in, I hear all the time that thank you. We didn't know this, we haven't been doing this, so thank you. Frank has been helping me a lot with making sure different things are addressed as properly and as efficiently as they can be. So with that being said, I'm just working and continuing the work that he had done, but moving it and taking it to other levels.
When I mentioned the whole African American majority, the reason I mentioned that purposely is you actually represent Delmar, and there's been for many decades the Delmar divide, where if you go south of Delmar, which is predominantly white, but there have been a lot of African Americans who have moved to South St. Louis, you see a lot more investment, you see a lot more wealth, you see less crime. You go north of Delmar, which I guess the predominant, most of your ward is north of Delmar, which is usually like 95% African American. You don't see the investment. You see a lot more crime. And you don't see the same opportunities as you see south of Delmar.
Right.
And from talking with you before, one of your big goals is to bridge the Delmar divide.
Yes.
And I want you to talk a little bit about how you actually do this, because I'm sure if it could have been done, it would have been done 50 or 60 years ago, which is why this seems like a multi-generation project rather than a multi-year project. But I'm interested to hear your take on that.
Speaking of multi-generational projects, I was just speaking with Building Commissioner Frank Oswald and showed him some articles from when my grandfather was alderman, dealing with some zoning and blighting issues that we are still dealing with today, that we are still fighting for today, which we just in Ways and Means passed. And I'm going to be honest, I did not vote for it because of the concerns of my constituency, saying that they felt like this was going to be disproportionately targeted towards homeowners and people that were just trying to literally maintain and live in their homes. But it's kind of like a zone. It's going to be a task force to address zoning, address fees and fines and things of keeping your building codes up. Okay, I voted against it, but in voting, it passed. So now with me, you have to move forward on where we go from there. And I talked with Cara Spencer, who presented it, Alderman Cara Spencer, who presented the amendment, and she went straight up to Frank, and she talked to Frank, and now we have some pieces of that make me feel a lot better and make me feel like it's not going to be, again, disproportionately targeting. So with that being said, a lot of things that have been going on are going to go on. I feel like at this point that we have a chance to now work together to make change and move things forward in something that helps both sides. It's here. It's, we can't lie about it. There is a divide in St. Louis. And the divide not only shows in housing, it not only shows in education, it not only shows in economics, but it shows literally down at their Board of Aldermen. So, and with the way people vote and the way people go, you just have to now, I can only speak for myself when I say I want to make a commitment to work forward and move forward from a lot of these things the best way I can.
When you say you vote differently, can you kind of expound upon that a little bit? Like, how does the Delmar divide affect how people vote on issues in the Board of Aldermen?
Well, because this is all public knowledge, I'm just going to have a frank conversation with you today. That $300,000 pot was voted on, and it was voted, the black alderman voted one way and the white alderman voted another way. And that being said, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't personal. I'm speaking for myself now. It wasn't personal, but it was about, and this is what I spoke with Alderman Spencer at afterwards. For me, when I go down there and vote, I vote the voice of my constituency. It's not, again, it might not always be my personal preference, but I have to say, what would the constituents of the 26th Ward want me? How would they want me to represent them down here? And that's how I feel like I have to vote. My ward is considered a North Ward. It is considered probably more black ward than some of the other wards that start reaching the Delmar area. But I have a lot of Caucasian constituency that have moved north of Delmore. I do. And I mean, I have to make sure that I have to make sure that they feel just as well served as the constituency that I protect. I am African American. I'm a proud African American woman. So, of course, if you feel like I would not fight for you because I'm black and you're white, I don't want you to feel that way, and I hope I don't do anything to make you feel that way. But at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I have to do to protect the greater good of the 26th ward, which is something that my grandfather used to always speak to us about. Do it for the greater good, not for yourself. Do it for the greater good.
On the public safety front, this seems to be the issue when I bring aldermen and alderwomen in here, is foremost on their mind. Even in South St. Louis wards, crime has been a big problem over the last 10 years. What do you... I asked this question knowing that the mayor is largely in charge of the strategy and execution with the police department. And the Board of Aldermen certainly can offer suggestions, but the mayor and the police department can just ignore them. Like, what do you see as the best strategy toward bringing crime down, bringing murders down, bringing robberies and violent crime down? Because I feel like if there's one thing that's causing people to leave the city beyond the schools, it's probably the crime situation.
Absolutely.
So I want you to expound upon that.
Well, what I will say is that, first and foremost, Judge Jimmy Edwards and the work he's doing as Director of Public Safety, and I teased him when he first got the job, I guess about my grandfather being the first African-American Director of Public Safety. We kind of teased about that. Let's see what you do, but obviously, clearly different issues, different time, different issues. But he's doing some great things. And I've seen him in big meetings and I've seen him in smaller meetings. And he comes out and he's hands-on and he's trying to make sure he makes the specific changes and does the best practices to make our city safer. And he has the numbers to prove the work he's been doing. Also, Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, the work she's doing in diversion programs and trying to be more proactive instead of reactive with crime, and understanding that you can't, and I believe this, you can't incarcerate our way out of this crime problem. So I feel like those are some of the things that we're doing right now. I told you that my mother was nurse practitioner at Courtney Clinic. She was also Deputy Director of Health for the city of St. Louis under Dr. Larry Fields. So I kind of grew up under a public health background as well. So the idea of making public safety and making crime a public health issue, it really stands out to me, and I support it 100%. I talked to Dr. Eccles about this. So in speaking to that today, again, out of Ways and Means Committee, we passed an amendment that's going to put $500,000 behind a program called Cure Violence, that not only are we now putting the amendment to put the money to support, but it was reported that Director Jimmy Edwards, Judge Director Jimmy Edwards, Mayor Cruzen, and President Reed are also going to support it as well. So I think that will be a definite step in a different direction to try to address public safety.
And what is Cure Violence from what you've heard? Like, what would it do, and where would that money go toward?
I don't know. I don't want to say specifically what it goes for in the program. They are going to be bringing some meetings to just show us and inform us and educate us on exactly what they do. But I know that they do. It's a diversion. If you want to put it in a word, it's a diversion program. But again, when you put it under a public health arm, it just brings and opens up different resources to the issue that I think that we need. And they also, because they work in conjunction with the police departments, the other programs that are already in place, I think that it's just a shot. It's a shot because if you can look at numbers and look at statistics and see if things haven't changed, at some point, if you have the resources to do it, you should try.
We'll be back right after this message with Alderwoman Shameem Clark Hubbard.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
And we're back with Alderwoman Shameem Clark Hubbard, the Democrat from the 26th Ward. I want to talk about a couple of issues that may come up in the Board of Aldermen over the next couple of years. And one thing that the mayor mentioned in her State of the City address in particular was a possible repeal of a charter amendment requiring certain employees to live in the city of St. Louis. Now, this is probably an issue that actually affects your ward maybe more than others because it does border St. Louis County. What's kind of your thoughts on that idea? Because I think it's being posited as a way to get more qualified candidates. On the other hand, the city could lose some revenue if they allow people not to live there, especially with, property taxes and whatnot. So what have been your thoughts on that issue?
Right. So my thoughts have been, I've been studying it. So right now you're talking about Board Bill 34, which is still in committee right now. There are some pros and cons, which like anything, there are some pros and cons. Now I have a lot of city employees that live in my ward. I don't think that this would make them up and move, which is how they're scaring people out of supporting this, but they do have numbers that'll show a percentage of people that they feel like would up and move, and that is a concern because we would lose the property taxes, we wouldn't lose the city earnings taxes. So I think they're doing some changes to it. That's why I don't want to speak exactly to what's on that bill. I know they were thinking about trying to do some incentive amendments and things like that, but at the end of the day, like I said before, if you can show me that it wouldn't hurt, but it would help more. I know it might hurt a little bit, then I think that I would be for it. Be for it.
And the reason I was just tapping on my phone right now is I read an article in the Post-Dispatch about a police officer who left the city because they have a child with special needs, which is actually the exact reason I left the city and moved to St. Louis County, because I wanted to take advantage of the special school district. And I think that was used as one of the reasonings behind waiving the residency requirement, that you have situations where city employees have family members that need an arguably better special education services in the county, which I've talked about ad nauseum. But the question that I would have, and I don't know if you've been studying the whole disparity between the city and county with special education, is why wouldn't the solution be trying to bring more money into the city for special education instead of waiving the residency requirement? Because that seems to be hurting families that can't leave the city right now, and that could also be an incentive for city employees to stay. I know it's a very specific example, but I guess that it leads into a broader question of like trying to make the city more attractive to people rather than like letting them live elsewhere. What's kind of your thought about that?
I agree with you 100%. And I'm going to ask if I can talk with Alderwoman Howard about just that, because again, it's still in committee, so it's still open, and that might be something that we can add, to her bill, to her ordinance. No, I haven't studied specifically the special needs, but not to say that I don't know that it's a problem, because I do. I have family members who are dealing with some of the special needs concerns. So I think that that's one of the things that's actually an argument that I haven't heard before, and I'm now eager to bring it up. The argument that I've heard on the opposition side is that when we open it up, a lot of our people will leave because of the history. They will leave, and then the people that come in will not. The employees that come in will not have the same, for lack of a better word, heart or compassion or sensitivity to the issues of people of our communities in the city of St. Louis. So when I talk about those, I'm talking about some of the bigger entities like the police department, the fire department, things like that. But it still reaches down to your regular workers just in City Hall, or your workers at the, different construction trade jobs, or trade jobs that you can say, oh, they can't do it now because they don't live in the city. So I've heard so many arguments now on both sides. Again, your argument, which I think is a very valid one, and if we can't do it that way, still needs to be addressed, the special needs resources. But
that gets down another rabbit hole. But
we can go.
Well, I will bring this up, and I brought it up on other shows. I didn't want to leave the city of St. Louis. Like, I wanted to remain here. But when your doctor basically diagnosed your son with a developmental disability and says, you need to leave St. Louis City for the county because SLPS will not serve your child.
Wow.
Like, you can't not listen to that. And I absolutely know for a fact that's happened to other families. But rather than just like say, woe is Jason Rosenbaum for leaving the city, the problem with this is there are a lot of families, especially and I'm going to say, especially African American families
Yeah.
that don't have a car, that may not be able to afford housing in the county. And it's just kind of baffling to me, given that this has been a problem for decades now, why this hasn't been more seriously addressed by city leaders. I know you've only been in office for 3 months, so this is not meant to be disparaging to you. And obviously this is something that needs state action as well as like local vote. But like, has that been something that your constituents have talked about, like what I just told you, or is this something that is kind of out of the blue, out of nowhere?
Well, like I said, personally, it's not out of the blue because I have families that have been directly affected by that. But it's not something that has come up. I'm being honest, it's not something that has come up in my body constituency things. But with that being said, I we just started a new committee called Education and Youth Matters, and I chose to be on that committee. All the committees that I serve on, I asked for, and I chose to be on that committee because I'm a proud St. Louis Public School parent. I have 2 children in St. Louis Public Schools. My parents both worked in St. Louis Public Schools, and I have one of the proudest members, just elected members of the elected school board, Dr. Joyce Roberts, in my ward. And when I was running, it was important for her. She wanted to set up education committees in every ward. But bigger than that, now we have an actual standing committee down at the Board of Aldermen, which is great. So this, what you are speaking about, is exactly what that committee was formed for. I'm on the committee, so I'm committing to you right now to be a voice for that issue and see how we can rectify those problems.
And just before we move on to another topic, when I say that state action needs to happen, from talking with other people, let's just say you wanted the city to join the special school district. And by join, I mean adopt the property tax so, they could take advantage of the pooled money. You'd probably the legislature would have to pass a bill that would basically allow the city and county to vote for it, which is not a sure thing. And you have to convince city residents and county residents to vote for it. In the case of the city, would be raising their property taxes to do it. And after so many other taxes have been raised, it's going to be a tough sell for people, especially if it doesn't affect them. But I mean, as you can tell, I have talked to literally dozens of people about this issue, and you yourself have probably been affected personally. The status quo for special education in the city is not acceptable for people that can't leave. And every time I have a City of St. Louis person on this show, I always have to bring it up, even if it is a little bit self-serving. But I think it's really important.
It's very important. It's absolutely important. And just going in my mind, out of the families that I know for a fact have dealt with that, it's sad only one of them is still in St. Louis Public Schools. The other families, they live in the city, but they were able to get into the DSEG pool, or I know people that have paid to get there.
And not a lot of people can do that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So I'm glad we could talk about that. And also it is relevant to the fact that you're on that committee.
Yeah.
The other topic I want to talk to you about, because when we were talking offline, you have a lot of airport workers in your ward.
Yes.
I'm sure they're all kind of watching this whole quote-unquote airport privatization debate very closely. For our listeners, airport privatization is kind of the term used for this search to get a private operator to run Lambert International Airport. And it's kind of in its infancy. I don't think there's actually been a proposal yet. They're kind of still studying it. But it's obviously very controversial. Anytime you talk about bringing in a private entity to a public entity like an airport, and when there's kind of a profit motive behind it, even if there is like an upfront cash payment to the city, there are just going to be people who just are going to reject it outright because they don't trust that type of arrangement. What are you hearing from your constituents about it? Because you just told me before we press record, you hear about this almost on a daily basis.
I hear about this on a daily basis. Even what I was speaking to you about, Jason, even if you all aren't reporting on it or nobody's reporting on it, I literally get a text, a email, a call, or some kind of reach in social media. Please do not let this go through. They're afraid. They use the word scared. They use the word fear. I have a very high contingency of airport employees that live in my ward, and I promise them, and they're so scared, or they're so worried about it that they don't want to be public about it. they don't want to speak out publicly themselves, so they're trusting me to do that for them, and I absolutely am. So, I mean, with that being said, I watch the meetings. I watch the coverage of the meetings. I'm just watching it because, like you said, nothing has really come out yet. It's just talking about it. No plan, no formal proposal or anything has come out yet. But I also plan to talk to some of the other entities on the back end, not just employees, but higher administrative staff and things at the airport, just to get a better knowledge about what this means so that we can make sure we convey it to people right. Because right now, all they hear in my ward is airport privatization, no.
I think one of the potential benefits if this deal, any deal goes through, is a private entity would offer the city an upfront payment. We don't know how much it would be, but it could be in the billions of dollars. And one of the ways they may try to get support from African American aldermen is they may say, well, let's say it's $3 billion. $1.5 billion is just going to go strictly to the north side on infrastructure, on tearing down vacant buildings, on economic development opportunities. What would you think if that happened? Because I certainly understand the arguments against privatization of any governmental entity, but when you're in a pretty desperate situation like a lot of north side wards, that may be a pretty enticing deal where the ends justify the means. So I'm sure you've heard stuff like that. So I'm interested in your take.
I understand about pretty enticing deals, but at the end of the day, I have to support and represent the constituency that voted me in and elected me to be the voice for them. So we have funds now coming. We have a lot of funds for vacancies and buildings being torn down. We have over in the 26th ward, we have a new plan that we just Cornerstone got an investment from a grant rather from Invest STL. We have plans and things going into place. We have a lot of movement going into place that would kind of support those to where I don't think that you should be able to just throw out money and it doesn't support the greater good. Or, like you said, makes it look and sound good, but it's still not packaged good for the person that is going to directly affect. So for me, I have people in my ward that airport privatization is going to directly affect. And if you don't make the case to them that they're going to be okay, they don't want to hear about how many buildings you're going to be able to tear down because you sold the airport. It still just doesn't make sense to them.
I guess you're going to have to see an actual plan and proposal before you say, I'm going to vote. Because the Board of Aldermen may be voting on this. I don't know, but I would assume that they would have to.
I think they have to.
So I don't want to pin you down and say, are you going to vote yes or no on any plan? Because you obviously have to see the plan. But it doesn't seem from what you said, you're super enthusiastic about it. And it would have to be a super great plan for the employees, especially for you to support it. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. Not just the employees, but what you're speaking about kind of speaks to community benefits agreements. All those things will have to be in place. But starting with, here again, who I was elected to represent, my constituents in the 26th ward. The greater good is what I'm always on. It's not about what I feel personally, but about how the people that elected me would want to be represented. So yes, I would have to see all of that, and I would have to then not see it for myself and make a decision, but I would want to take it back to them. To me, it's just everything, it has to be public and transparent for people to trust and believe in the process. If you don't, then we're going to continue to have this disenfranchisement and disheartening processes in the city of St. Louis.
Before I let you go, I just kind of want to get your general impressions of being on the Board of Aldermen. You're one of 3 new members. The board has had a lot of turnover in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, so there's still some institutional knowledge, but probably not as much as it used to. What benefit do you think that you bring to the table of having this kind of longer political memory that we talked about at the beginning of the show, and also kind of knowing the realities of politics and policy? I'm just interested how it's been over the last month and a half for you. Yeah.
It's been great. Let me tell you, I've been excited. It's a lot going on in my ward. Between the Delmar Divine project, they're talking about breaking ground soon, and I have homes being not only just built but remodeled and stabilized, and protecting the integrity of our neighborhoods. I have businesses coming in. I have businesses that are wanting to come in. I think this is a good time for a person like me. And speaking about my friend, former Senator Jeff Smith, he says that he feels that I have a unifying voice and that I can be a unifying voice. And just, I think, that speaks to what I did today after the vote went down twice. We re-voted on that twice so that it could in turn pass the $300,000 for the building inspectors. Afterwards, I went straight to Alderman Spencer and I talked to her. What do we do now? Where do we move forward so that everybody feels like this is going to help and be for, again, I say it all the time, the greater good of the city of St. Louis. The committees I chose to serve on, Ways and Means, Public Safety, public employees, the Education and Youth Matters, legislation. I chose to be on all these committees so that I could be here again, a unifying voice, because I know a lot of the histories. I know what's going on now. I know I've learned what not to do and what to do from people I've been around, and what might help and what absolutely did not help. And that's what I do. I never make a decision for myself. I always make a decision with all parties involved. So I'm excited about the position and the role I'm playing as new. I ask a lot of questions. I go meet with people all the time. I might be getting on some people's nerves, but it doesn't matter, because the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And I will say, I joke about that, but probably the office I've been in the most is building division, is Frank Oswald's. And Frank has always had an open door, and his staff has always had an open door and answered all my questions, because the vacancies and the landlords and things like that are one of the biggest issues in my ward. So just being a resource and being able to provide more resource now to the constituents in the 26th ward, I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about the direction that the ward is going in.
I should also mention, because we didn't actually mention this at the beginning, there are two Hubbards on the Board of Aldermen. Mm-hmm. Your sister-in-law, Tamika Hubbard, represents the 5th Ward. Is there any benefit of having double Hubbards in the Board of Aldermen? I just have to ask that before we leave.
Of course, I'm going to say it's a benefit to have me and my sister-in-law down there. We don't use the word in-law. She's my sister, yeah. So, of course, I'm going to say there's a benefit. In fact, I don't see what would be a disadvantage of having. Both of us are totally 100% committed to serving in our wards. Yeah. And the history and the shows.
Yeah, that wasn't a serious question that you had to really delve in, but I just.
But you'll be surprised how many people bring up things like that.
I know, but I just wanted to say the term double Hubbards because there's an alliterative nature to it. So,
I was just going to say also what I wanted to touch on. This also is it's an important time because we're coming up on Alderman John Muhammad has Board Bill number 11 that is trying to take the ward reduction back to the vote, back to the people. And I think that that's a good thing. I support him 100% on that. It's actually, I ran from Intergovernmental Affairs Committee because I was going to speak on his behalf at that committee hearing because his board bill is in committee. And what I'm saying with that is, it's not saying that I am 100% in support of it or 100% behind the ward reduction because I don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that looks like plan-wise, on paper-wise. But I think there's no harm in taking it back to the vote of the people because a lot of people, here again, that I speak to in my constituency were confused and misunderstood. And they might have voted or not voted. They didn't know the difference between voting for or against or not voting at all and what that meant to that. But they do know that they feel like they're not being properly served now, and they do not support, when you just talk to them, they don't support a ward reduction because they feel like if you can't do the job now, what is it going to look like when we don't have that many?
Is there fear that ward reduction could disproportionately harm African-American wards?
Absolutely.
And explain why.
Because they feel like it would disproportionately take away the vote and the vote of African-American elected officials. So they feel like if you just look at it, all of us would run against each other. We wouldn't have the same representation that some of the South Side wards have because they have, on paper, more population than we do. So when they have to break these wards up and cut these wards down to have the numbers in them, it looks like that we won't have as many wards. So that means that we won't have as many African-American elected officials.
Final question on this topic. Mm-hmm. Is there any fear, though, if you put this back on the ballot, voters are just going to retain the ward reduction, considering it passed by a pretty significant margin?
I haven't heard that on my side, but that's because my side wants it back on the ballot. My side does not want ward reduction. That's the consistency of the constituency in the 26th ward. Of course, I do have people in my ward that said we voted on it and we won it. But there's no harm, to me, there's no harm in putting it back on the ballot because people they just misunderstood some things about that. And they felt like if they knew better, they would have voted differently, or I'm just going to say, or voted at all, because some people didn't even vote because they didn't understand how serious this is.
Well, Alderwoman, thank you so much for coming on this show, and we look forward to having you back in the years ahead. One of the benefits,
have me back.
Yes, one of the benefits of being on this show once is you get to come back on again.
Okay.
We don't have to go through your life story and everything. We can actually just laser focus on issues.
Mm-hmm.
For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @Rosenbaum. How can people follow you not only on Twitter, but also Facebook, Instagram? I'm sure you have a MySpace page.
No, I don't. No, listen, I was telling the young lady here that I have this presence on social media, but I can't take credit for it. Literally, on the way down to the Board of Elections to file, my stepdaughter, my daughter, Ayana Hubbard, set up all these pages for me. I had Twitter, but that's all I had. Remember, because that's how I followed you.
I know you have Twitter.
I had Twitter, but she said, "Mom, you can't do this without the social media." And she drugged me, kicking and screaming. But literally, from the time we left from the West End and got down to the Board of Elections, she had my Facebook page, my Instagram page set up, and all that place. And I don't know if I would have won without it, so I thank her for that all the time. And on all my social media platforms, it's my full name, Shameem Clark Hubbard.
Thank you very much, and follow her on all those platforms. You have
Please.
a great Instagram game going on, by the way.
Thank you.
Until next time, so long.
Thank you, Jay.
You take